Hello everyone. Today I'm here with this video after a really long time, and as already informed to all of you in the community tab section, people who were supposed to make videos and also contribute to this channel in terms of content, we're all busy with preparation. I was also busy with the preparation and with exams and things like that, so I couldn't really come up with videos, couldn't really spare a lot of time to make and edit videos and come up with relevant content to help you in your preparation. But now I thought it's the right time to help you in whatever little way possible through discussions on important topics that I come across in mostly current affairs related and other important topics that we'll pick up as we move ahead. And I'll try to bring up videos on important topics as they come. And the only idea, the motive is to add some value to your preparation, to whatever it is that you are doing in the course of preparing for the civil services examination. And I'd like to actually thank all those people who have actually stayed on this channel. If you think that the content here might benefit somebody, feel free to share it. So without much ado, let us get into the topic for today's discussion, that is the oil and the dollar, India's twin challenges. So this is based on an editorial that was there in the Indian Express, and what we will look at is the implications of the oil and dollar fluctuations that are happening in the economy. First and foremost, the Russia-Ukraine crisis has basically impacted import-dependent countries like India. Along with this, recently also, what has happened is that the US Federal Reserve has decided to for monetary tightening, that is a tight monetary policy wherein they have had a series of interest rate hikes. So we'll come to that. But before that, let's try and understand the correlation between oil and dollar. Alright, so basically, the US dollar is actually the standard currency that is used for paying for oil globally. And ये जो US dollar है, this is the medium of exchange. So countries that buy crude oil and those that produce crude oil exchange the US dollar. And this particular system is known as the petrodollar system. This is known as the petrodollar system. Now, this basically dates back to an agreement that was signed between the United States and Saudi Arabia way back in 1945. तो अगर कोई कंट्री एक दूसरे कंट्री से ऑयल खरीद रहा है तो वो कंट्री उस दूसरे कंट्री को डॉलर्स में पे करेगा. That is the idea. So all these transactions take place in dollars. So that is the standard currency, and this is the petrodollar system. Now, if we look at the top 10 oil producing countries in the world, the first position is held by the United States. So this is important. So initially, a few years ago, US was basically a net importer of oil, but it then turned to a net exporter in 2020, and eventually in 2021, since 2021, it is the largest global producer. So it is the first in amongst the oil producing countries in the world. So because let's say US is exporting the most amount of oil, so if there is a rise in oil prices, there is more of incoming dollar in the US. Okay, so this helps the United States earn more revenue. If oil prices go up, if the oil prices go up, United States would get more revenue because it is at the first position when it comes to production of oil. So a rise in oil prices means more of dollars inside the US. एंड अगर दूसरी कंट्री से, अगर आप ये देखिए यहाँ पर, अगर एक दूसरी कंट्री से डॉलर आ रहा है, यहाँ दूसरी कंट्री से डॉलर आ रहा है, सो उस कंट्री से डॉलर बाहर जा रहा है, एंड इन टर्न what happens is that this strengthens the dollar. If you remember in economy, if there is less of dollar supply, let's say versus rupee supply, there's a lot of rupee supply, and dollar supply अगर कम होते जा रहा है उसके सामने, what happens in that case is that the rupee weakens and the dollar becomes stronger. Similarly, here what is happening is when there is more of when there's an increase in oil prices, countries will anyhow, they cannot do away with importing oil, they will import oil. But what is happening for those countries is more of dollar is going out from their countries, and when more of dollar is going out, their currency, that country's currency is weakening and the dollar is strengthening. So this makes the US dollar stronger. So there is a direct implication of increasing oil prices on the strength of the US dollar. Now, India's oil import और consumption की अगर हम बात करें, so this is a fact that India is the world's third largest oil consumer. So आप सोच सकते हैं कि how much of oil we consume, and now how these rise in prices are actually going to affect us, given that the oil prices are increasing and also given that the dollar is strengthening and the rupee is weakening. Right? So India basically, India's 86% of oil needs are actually imported. तो हम 86% of our needs जो है वो बाहर से लेते हैं in terms of oil, and basically 60% of our imports of oil are from the Middle East. So the Middle East actually accounts for 60% of the oil that India buys. And while there we also buy from Latin America and Africa. So now, what are the implications of high oil prices for India? So first and foremost thing, which is something that we can directly infer, is that there is going to be an increase in our import bill. Q? Because we, as I said, we import 86% of our oil needs. So a huge part of our imports is actually that of crude oil. So crude oil forms a huge part of our imports. So actually more than 30% of our imports, total imports, are of crude oil. Take crude oil. So 30% of our total, more than 30% of our total imports is crude oil. Okay, crude oil has a share of 30 to 33% in total imports. And obviously अब 30 से 33% आपका जो import है उसमें अगर prices बढ़ रहे हैं, that automatically increases our import bill, and उससे direct implication क्या होगा? It will directly lead to an increase in the current account deficit. And what does an increasing current account deficit mean? When our imports are much more, when our imports go much higher than our exports, then it leads to a very high current account deficit. बहुत ज़्यादा अगर import हम कर रहे हैं तो in comparison to what we are exporting, it will automatically lead to an increased current account deficit. So that is one implication, increased current account deficit. So the first implication is that this will negatively affect India's current account deficit. And what the government has to do when the fuel prices go up, when the oil prices go up, is that there has to be an increased subsidy, increased amount that has to be spent on subsidies. Government does give fuel subsidies, right? So this will mean increasing India's fuel subsidies. For instance, the LPG subsidy. LPG is obtained from crude oil. So LPG is made from crude oil refining, and thus what will happen is that there will be an increased burden on the government. So current account deficit, as I said, indicates that the country is actually importing more than it is exporting, right? Then, so the other implication is another very obvious implication, that is inflation. Inflation in the sense that because prices of crude oil are increasing, it will result in inflation. There are so many different things that are dependent on oil and petroleum, and those things that are linked to oil and petroleum, their prices will also go up because of prices of crude oil going up. So basically inflation will happen. And this is what kind of inflation? This is basically what we can call a cost push inflation. So if you remember, there are two kinds of inflation, if you have read it. One is a demand pull inflation and the other is the cost push inflation. So this is the cost push kind of inflation that is going to happen over here. अब एक और चीज ये है यहाँ पर, this is a little something that we'll try and understand. See, when the dollar is getting stronger, it is directly going to make the rupee weaker. It will create a weakening of the Indian currency. Now, see, now weakening of the Indian currency. We'll go a little into this and try and understand also why recently there has been a strengthening of the dollar and the weakening of the rupee. Very briefly we'll look into it and we'll come back to the implications again. So in recently, sometime in July this year, the US Federal Reserve, that is the central bank of the United States, decided to increase the interest rates. Interest rates को बढ़ाने का फैसला लिया वहाँ के central bank ने, ठीक है, interest rates. Now, as a result of this, the dollar supply जो है वो कम हो गया, right? So what happens when US का Federal Reserve, the US central bank, increases its interest rates? What happens is that it tries to reduce the supply of the dollar in the market. When that happens, let's talk in context of India. Let's say अब धीरे धीरे डॉलर का सप्लाई जो है वो कम हो रहा है and rupee का supply in its comparison बहुत ज़्यादा है. So what will happen? When such a scenario arises, the rupee weakens. When the supply of dollar reduces in comparison to the supply of rupee, then the value of the dollar goes up and the value of the rupee goes down. So now what will RBI do to tame this? RBI क्या step लेगा इस केस में to increase? अब let's say इंडिया के केस में हमारे पास डॉलर कम होते जा रहे हैं for whatever reasons. अब जब डॉलर कम होगा तो आरबीआई के पास अपने फोरेक्स रिजर्व में, तो आरबीआई हैज डॉलर्स इन इट्स फोरेक्स रिजर्व, अपने फोरेक्स रिजर्व से निकाल के द आरबीआई विल ट्राई टू पुट मोर डॉलर्स हियर सो दैट देयर इज एन इक्विलिब्रियम दैट इज रीच्ड एंड द वैल्यू ऑफ द रूपी डज नॉट फॉल डाउन फर्दर. बिकॉज अगर बहुत ज्यादा रूपी है इन कंपैरिजन, बहुत ज्यादा सप्लाई ऑफ रूपी है इन कंपैरिजन टू the supply of dollar, the rupee will depreciate and may depreciate drastically. तो अगर यूएस फेडरल रिजर्व अपने इंटरेस्ट रेट्स बढ़ा रहा है, सप्लाई ऑफ डॉलर कम हो रहा है, तो इसके रिस्पॉन्स में आरबीआई क्या करेगा? आरबीआई अपने फॉरेक्स रिजर्व से डॉलर्स जो है वो निकालेगा एंड विल पुट इट इन टू द सिस्टम. However, some critics say that RBI should not be doing this. RBI should not deplete its forex reserves in response to what US is doing, because our forex reserves should be kept for more of emergency situations, and this should not be dealt with by depleting forex reserves. That is what some experts think of, but that is another thing altogether. अब एक चीज ये है कि डिप्रिसिएशन जब हो रहा है तो what is the effect? This is one thing that we have to understand. जब डिप्रिसिएशन हो रहा है तो उसका क्या असर होता है एक्सपोर्ट्स के ऊपर और इंपोर्ट्स के ऊपर. डिप्रिसिएशन मतलब लेट अस से पहले $1 जो है दैट वाज इक्वल टू 70 रुपीज. ठीक है, इट वाज इक्वल टू 70 रुपीज. अब $1 जो है लेट अस से 80 रुपीज हो गया है. Okay, this is what. So when such a scenario happens, अब हम इंडिया से अगर इंडिया is exporting something, let us say India is exporting something, India was exporting something for 70 rupees. अब ये बाहर में let us say US में कोई खरीद रहा है, so that is equal to $1. But when the rupee depreciates, what happens is that now this product we are still sending out at 70 rupees, but in US इसका cost $1 से कम होगा because rupee जो है वो depreciate कर गया है. So this product's cost in US will now be lesser than what it was. So our product outside has become more competitive. Now when our product outside has become more competitive, it is good for the exports. So जब डिप्रिसिएशन होता है ये एक्सपोर्ट्स के लिए फायदेमंद होता है. On वही तक on the other hand, when we talk about the imports, how does it affect the imports? Let us say we are importing something from the US. India is importing something from the US. We imported that product for $1. So that at that time earlier we had to pay 70 rupees. Now depreciation has happened and we are still importing it at $1 because they are not going to change the cost of the product. Now at $1 we are importing, and now we have to pay 80 rupees. So depreciation when it happens, it is bad for the imports. So imports become costlier when depreciation happens. This is something we have to understand. So coming back to the implications. Now, when we come back to the implications, we saw that one of the implications of the rising oil prices and strengthening of the dollar is weakening of the Indian currency. अब इसके response में होगा क्या? Now, what happens is, as I told you, that it will lead to costlier imports. Our imported items will become more expensive. So this is bad for our imports, which means we'll have to pay more for our imports. So imported items will become more expensive. Though it may benefit the exports, but it will be bad for the imports. So costlier imports. Also, as I said, when the Indian currency weakens, what RBI will do in response is generally increase the supply of dollar in the system by taking out dollars from its forex reserves. So it will lead to a decrease in India's forex reserve and can eventually lead to a depletion of India's forex reserves. So this will lead to a decline in the forex reserves. The next implication, like I already told you, would be that on industries that use oil, right? User industries of oil like chemicals, plastics, fertilizers, उनको फिर से problem होगा. Their input costs will go up, and that is what is again a kind of cost push. Inflation will go up. Input cost उनका बढ़ जाएगा, and that will put a pressure on their profit margins, and if they try to, they will still try to keep the profit margins. So that will lead, that will, what we can say, there will be a transmission of this in the form of increased costs for customers. Another implication of this, which is not very significant for us at this point of time, is that the governments, because this is something automatically that's going to happen because of increasing oil prices, state governments will have a better VAT collections, value added tax collections, with an increase in oil prices. But that is something that really we shouldn't be really bothering about at this point of time. Now, what we have to understand is the implications that we have discussed. These are the important implications, right? Now, see, oil prices are going up and the rupee is declining. But these are problems that are not happening because of domestic microfinancial parameters or because of domestic factors. These are all external. These are all influenced by external factors because of geopolitical situations that are existing currently, because of actions that the US Federal Reserve is taking, and other factors that are not really right now in India's hands. So, if the RBI continues to try to balance this depreciation, or try to stop this depreciation by depleting its forex reserves, then that would be problematic, because if we do that, our forex reserves will decline. And what is the purpose of forex reserves? Forex reserves basically act as an insurance, and they have to be used to cut volatility. But they can't be the only tool to handle currency, right? So what we have to understand is that we cannot battle this kind of situation that is happening at the global level by just depleting our forex reserves. So that is something that is important. So RBI's intervention and protection of currency has certain limitations. There are other steps that need to be taken to handle this particular situation, and it has to be seen. Some experts say that you should allow the rupee to depreciate rather than deplete the country's forex reserves. Because if you intervene too much by putting in too much of dollars into the system, you would ultimately burn up the forex reserves. So what is one thing that can be done? One thing that we can do right at this point of time is that our current account deficit जो है, हम उसको कम और कौन से तरीके से कर सकते हैं? हम oil imports, ठीक है, immediate level पे हम कम नहीं कर सकते हैं, but we'll have to think of strategies for the long run. We'll have to think of making transitions, of reducing our dependence on those fossil fuels, on oil. Okay, we have to put what we can think of. There is the way of reducing the current account deficit. See, when our import and exports, so when our import is much greater than our export, there is a current account deficit. So how do we reduce the current account deficit? So what we can do is we can put a curb on imports of non-essential goods such as gold, and in that sense we'll be able to conserve our dollars. We'll have to see, जब import हम चीजों को import करते हैं तो हम डॉलर बाहर भेज रहे हैं. अब इसका मतलब क्या है? हम डॉलर बाहर भेज रहे हैं तो हम अपने सिस्टम में डॉलर का सप्लाई और भी कम कर रहे हैं, और इसके कंपैरिजन में रुपी का सप्लाई ज्यादा है. So that will lead to further depreciation of our rupee. So that is something that we have to keep a check on. We have to keep a check on our imports. Sufficiency, working on self-sufficiency, working on becoming self-dependent is the major way to go about in the coming days. And the major thing that we have to do is reduce our dependence on imported oil. And the other thing that we can do is, because this is current account deficit is this, now we have to increase our exports. We have to try and boost up our export capacity. And this is a situation where countries are trying to move away from China. So India can actually exploit the situation and come into the forefront, and with its enhanced export capacity, export a lot of products and thus reduce its current account deficit and reduce that any impact that is happening on the currency. That is one way, that is the right way to go about. The right way to go about is not by injecting dollars into the system by depleting the forex reserves, right? So India should go for an increased use of international rupee in the international trade, for international trade. So these are things that we have to understand. So the global backdrop is such that experts say that the dollar will continue to strengthen, and they have also cautioned that the rupee will depreciate further, and RBI has to work out something so as to conserve its forex reserves in the face of this particular slide that is happening. At the same time, we have to take more comprehensive steps and have more comprehensive solutions to the problems that exist. In particular, we'll have to reduce our import dependency. We'll have to boost up our exports and boost up our export capacity, and steps have been taken in this direction with Atmanirbhar Bharat and other schemes, but we have to continue to enhance our export capacity. So with this, it is the end of this topic's discussion. What you can revise at this point of time, if you haven't revised for a long time, is maybe go up and revise and read balance of trade. And you can read up about the petrodollar system. You can read up about the balance of payment crisis that occurred once in India, right? The crisis that took place and what are the steps that India took to address that crisis through the LPG reforms. All of that you can just revise, and if you haven't recently, right? And that's it. So that is it for today, and we'll try and come up with more discussions as and when time permits, and hope this discussion was beneficial to you, and hopefully it was something that helped you enhance your understanding about certain things related to the topic that we discussed today. So that's all for now.